Okay. So can you all see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So again, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Francesco, and welcome to this training, which is part of the Muse project, named Human-Machine Interaction, Best Practices and Tools, together with Maria Bulgheroni from Italy. So I'm not going to delve into much into the training content because it was already introduced by Blanca, but yes, I'm going to start talking about human-machine interaction design first. Then Maria will jump in talking about project Workplan, and there's going to be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So we are starting to talk about user study design, and this is a very important part of the prototyping phase, because it is important to have in mind at the very beginning of your development, whether of the development of the prototype, the final scenario in which is going to be deployed, because this is going to hugely affect the design of your prototypes. So this is why we're doing this at the beginning of the concept feasibility phase, because it's something to be mindful of from the very beginning. So what is a user study? So very briefly, what a user study, in a user study, you assess, you validate your product, your system, and you typically have a system interacting with a user, most of the times performing a task together with it. More specifically, the user has to perform a task using the system that was devised for the user study. You typically collect measurements of this interaction with the system, and then you run statistical analysis later to understand, to assess the significance of the results that you've achieved during your user study. And usually you have more than two experimental conditions in your experiment. And by experimental condition, it could be anything ranging from different settings of your systems, different situations that the users can be put into. You name them according to the specific case you're investigating. But so it's a very important part of the whole process, and you have to be acquainted with it from the beginning. In designing a user study, there are a couple of documents that are crucial to draft on in order to have clear in mind what you are going to investigate. And what are those? Well, first of all, there is the data management plan, because as we said, you are going to collect measurements from the participants. So you need to make sure that the protocol to collect measurement is safe, it's not invasive. You need to make sure that GDPR policies are covered. You also need to possibly issue sharing policies for you to share the data later on. But again, however, we did a training on this on the 6th of November within the context of the Muse project. So for the data management plan, I'm telling you to refer to that training. We are going to go through the other documents that are typical of a user study design, starting from the experiment protocol, which is probably the most important document that which is representative of your user study design, because it's namely a breakdown of an instance of your user study. So in principle, if a researcher of another collaborator jumps in the middle of the prototyping phase and doesn't have a clear idea of what you're going to do in your user study, by reading the experiment protocol, they get a very good idea of what the experiment is about, how and why it is being done. So it's a comprehensive description of your experiment. And it starts from the pool of participants that you're going to recruit for your user study. Again, you should be able, in this document, you should specify how many participants you need for your user study, and also which kind of participants. So for instance, my personal experience, I ran a user study in the past. It was about a human-robot collaboration scenario for a collaborative manufacturing application. So my pool of participants that I targeted were apprentices in manufacturing from a specific company. So I was able to find participants that have experience with the context I want to deploy my system into, and also potentially that who are also going to benefit about the future application of my solution. So ideally, you should be able to do the same when you're going to run your user study. You'll be able to pinpoint the specific participants you need for your experiment. Now, I'm aware that this can be challenging according to what application you have devised for your prototype. Because of this, it is commonly accepted that the pool of participants doesn't necessarily resemble the ones for the actual end users of your application. So this potentially is still fine, but it's important that you make your case about why the results that you're going to achieve with a pool of participants that differs from the ideal one can be extended to the ideal participants, to your ideal end users, if you're not able to gather them from your user study. So again, the experiment protocol needs to report how many you need and the features through which you are going to select. Also some information about the recruitment process, but this will come up next in the presentation. Then you have to start with the description of your experiment. And again, this is very important because you need to be mindful about all the technical aspects of your experiment, starting from its duration. When you are devising the whole interaction with the users, you kind of have to picture in your mind how it will play out, so that you will be able to dedicate a good amount of time for you to deliver your experiment fully, without having to interrupt it in the middle because time is up. From my personal experience, I would say that 1 hour per 1 hour of experiment per user, per participant is a good amount. Is it not too little time, not too much time? But of course, it strictly depends on the task that you are devising. Now, again, if you think that you will need an experiment that lasts longer than an hour, again, if the premises of your task can't help you, but doing it in this way, of course you have to do it. But again, you have to be mindful that when you're going to recruit participants, you cannot there is the risk that they can get fatigued if you make them do the experiment for an extended period of time. So all of this to have taken into account while you're drafting your user study. Then again, you have to imagine what the participants will do during the study and and how the interaction with your system will play out. Something interesting to consider while you're designing the user studies, whether you have to do the experiment online or in person. If it's in person, you have to summon the participants at your venue, and you typically have a dedicated room for the experiment in which the participants perform the task that you're going to explain them on the day they show up. But this is the most common way. But if the premises of your experiment allow you to not have the need to summon people at a place, you can consider, for instance, if your final product is a user interface and the participants have to interact through the system through a user interface, why not moving this user interface on an online website that people can access from a link that you provide them once they decide to join the experiment? So again, these are all things that you should consider while you design your experiment, because if you managed to do it in person, that would save you a lot of time and resources. Again, continuing with the task description, you need to detail all the technicalities of your task. starting from whether you need one or more than one task to assess the quality of your prototype. Again, it strictly depends on your application, and you have to understand which tasks are suited for you to make your point about the advantage that your prototype offers to the users. Then you have to understand how many experimental conditions you need. So I can tell you why you need at least two of them. It's because you need to provide a feasible comparison term to assess your results against. Just make an example. If you perform a measurement of efficiency of your system, and on average you get a 0.8 out of 1 efficiency from your user study, you can say, oh, that's very good. But if you had a comparison term in which on average for similar tasks in literature, the average efficiency is 0.95, then your system is not good because it has a lower efficiency against your comparison term. Now, since most of user studies are peculiar and one of a kind, it is hard to find a comparison term in literature. There are some cases, but most of the time you need to make the comparison term on your own. And this is why you need at least two different conditions, which can then translate into two different settings of the same system, different scenarios, different tasks. You name them according to what you think it makes sense. As a personal suggestion, I will suggest to go beyond two conditions because any reviewer could then argue that your comparison term is somewhat trivial, so of course you're going to get a better result. So ideally, the conditions should investigate aspects for which it is difficult to estimate an answer a priori prior to doing your experiment. So again, if you can find two conditions, it's already good because you have your comparison term, but you can go even beyond two conditions, that would add a lot of value to your user study. Then something else you need to consider is whether you want to go for a within subjects or a between subjects user study. And this is mainly, what does it mean? In the within subjects, your participants get to experience all the conditions that you devised for your experiment. So again, you need to be mindful of the time that it takes to run one condition because you have to run it multiple times. But if that is feasible, you can you have a lot of data because from the same user, you can take multiple measurements, improving your data set. On the other hand, unfortunately, this could bring the risk for carryover effects. And this is because, just to give you an example, if in your experiment you have two conditions in which the task to do doesn't change, and you get a greater performance in the second condition, then a reviewer can argue, but maybe the system was more efficient because not because the system in that setting is better, but simply because the users became more used to the task that they were doing, and then it's difficult to tell whether it is because of this or because your system works better. Then, so if you're going for a within subject study, you need to devise some ways to take into account for these carryover effects. And again, there is no specific recipe for this. It's highly dependent on what you're going to do. And differently, you can go for a between subjects, and in this one, participants experience only one condition, and this is assigned randomly, even before knowing who is going to turn up on that day. You generally know how many people are going to turn up, and then you randomize the order of the assignment of the condition. This so between subjects doesn't have carryover effects because people get to experience the task only once, the interaction only once, but it is more demanding because now for a person you get only one measurement. So you need more people to collect a good amount of data. So these are all aspects that you need to take care of, and you have to choose which features best apply to your case study. This was about the experiment protocol. Then there are other documents that you should you should draft while devising your user study. And one of these is the risk assessment, because in this one you need to take into account all the potential sources of hazard that users can come across while doing your experiment. And of course, also a plan to cover those possible sources of hazard, so that your participant gets to have a safe and pleasant experience during your experiment. And again, this is again a huge suggestion of mine. The participants are not in your head, because, and happens very commonly because you are so used to your prototype, you are so used to the task because you've spent so long thinking about it, that in your mind it runs perfectly. So you think that when you run your experiment, people just show up to the place in time, they know exactly what to do, they understand things the very first time you explain to them. All this is never going to happen. So you need to imagine that your participant comes there without actually knowing what is going to do, with an exception I'm going to tell you right in a couple of seconds. But they are not proficient with the task that you're going to do. So you need to make sure that that is foolproof, let's say. They have to be able to do it without any possible sources of risk, and you have to cover for any potential mistakes that the users can do that can harm themselves during the experiment. Then another document is there's two of them, the participant information sheet and the consent form. The participant information sheet is a document that you give to people who are interested in doing your experiment. So they should read this prior to turning up to your experiment, and it has to be a very broad description, very generic. It doesn't have to be as detailed as the experiment protocol. So you won't give them the experiment protocol. You give a simplified version of it that doesn't talk about the aim of your experiment, because otherwise people are going to go there and they know already what they're going to be assessed against, and this is going to affect the outcome of your experiment. You also have to explain them how you're going to treat their data because of privacy policies, and you also provide them with a point of contact contact before and after the experiment. The consent form is a form they have to sign in which they agree to undergo your experiment and allow you to use the data you're going to collect. So now we get to this point, we have all these documents, we start designing our experiment. So we know our task, we know our participants, we cover for all potential risks, we know how the experiment is going to last, how many conditions is within subjects. Okay. During the experiment, you're gonna need to collect measurements of the interaction of your participants with the users, and those are going to be used as performance indicators to assess the validity and the usefulness, generally speaking, of your solution, of your prototype. So how could you measure the outcome of your experiment? So there are different ways of doing so. They can mainly be categorized into three main clusters that are qualitative measurements, quantitative measurements, and variance measurements. Now we are going to go through all three of them so that you have a good understanding of how to measure the outcome of your experiment. So we are starting from the qualitative measurements. These are, as the name tells you, qualitative, and allows you to do something that is called a thematic analysis, in which you collect the opinions of the users and see which are the common topics and the common statements that came out during the user study. So this is done by means of interviews that are typically administered by a psychologist, and there are different ways of administering these interviews. There are four main ways. One is the concurrent think aloud, in which you ask question to the participants during the experiment. And again, this, of course, can affect the interaction with the prototype itself, but you get a more immediate and sincere answer because they know they can tell you exactly how they feel because they've just experienced it. In the retrospective think aloud, you ask them the same questions after the experiment, so you don't interfere with the experiment itself, but but you are relying on the participants remembering all the whole interaction they had with your system. So, which again is not it can't be granted every time. Then there is the concurrent probing, in which you ask questions during the experiment upon the verification of certain conditions. So, for instance, in case of a user, if in your user study the participants interact with a user interface and they do a specific action, at that point that you ask the question, but only if that happens. So it's not necessarily you're going to ask these questions. The retrospective probing is the same, but you ask the questions at the end of the experiments, again, relying on people's memory. So these are the main qualitative measurements that you can use for measuring for your validation. Now we're going to delve into the quantitative measurements, which in simple terms are the numbers that you can use to make your point and on which you can run a statistical analysis later to assess whether your system fit the purpose or not. Now, there are of course, I mean, these measurements are very specific of your task. So you are the best person to tell yourself which are the parameters, the quantities of interest to my task, whether it's time related to time, related to power consumption, carbon footprint, you name them. I'm gonna now go through measurements that are really that are strictly related to interaction with system, to user interactions with systems, which are general because again we are not tailoring this explanation to a specific case scenario, but it's meant to give you an overview, something that you can draw inspiration from for your specific case study. So let's delve into them. First of all, you can, from a user study, you can assess the effectiveness of your system. And by effectiveness, we mean the accuracy of the accuracy of the system in completing tasks successfully. So in one measure of effectiveness is the completion rate, which is the which is a ratio between the number of times, number of tasks that were successfully completed by the user and the time that was allocated to the completion of them. By the way, for the ones who don't have a technical background, don't get scared from these mathematical formulas that I put in this slide. It's I'm going now through them so that you can have a better understanding, but they're not necessarily complicated. Once you get to understand them, they make sense to you. Then, regarding effectiveness, you can also compute the overall effectiveness of the system, which is the number of tasks that were successfully completed by the users divided by the product of the number of users and the number of tasks that your interaction was composed by. This is regarding effectiveness. Then you can also measure the efficiency of your system, and the efficiency is defined as the effectiveness proportional to the amount of resources that you spent during the interaction. One of the most common resources to consider during interaction with a system is time, for instance. And if you're considering time, a measure of efficiency is the time-based efficiency, which is the sum of all the ratios between the tasks that were completed and the time that was taken by the specific user to complete them, divided by the product of users and tasks that your interaction was composed by. Another one is the overall relative efficiency, which basically is a weighted average of the number of successfully completed tasks by the user, weighted on the time it took to the user to complete them. These, again, are very general definitions of effectiveness and efficiency measurements. And again, it's up to you to understand how you can tailor them to your specific case study. Something else that you can assess through quantitative measurements is the usability, namely, which is also defined as the level of satisfaction of the user in interacting with your system. Now, there is quantities like usability are usually assessed through self-reported questionnaires that you give to the users at the end of the interaction, which they use to rate their experience in this case, for instance, regarding usability. You see the system usability scale reported in the slide. It's a set of 10 questions that the user answers through a Likert scale, and which gives you later a measurement of usability. This, again, I didn't make this questionnaire. It's a standard that has been used for decades in literature. This questionnaire here is an important exception to what I said so far, that you need another condition, two conditions, because you need a comparison term to compare your solution against. This questionnaire doesn't need per se to have a comparison term that you have to make on your own. Because again, there has been a lot of research regarding usability, and there are a lot of references that are reported here in the slide that tells you that if you get a certain score with this questionnaire, no matter the condition, no matter your comparison term, if it's above a certain threshold, then you can deem your system acceptable by the users. So coming back with the example that I said couple of minutes ago, if you get an effective usability of 0.8, since it's above the threshold, you can say my system is accepted. It was accepted by the users. It's considered acceptable. So this is regarding usability. You can also probe users' emotional response to the interaction with your system. And there are different ways of measuring this by means of questionnaires. The most common one is the self-assessment mannequin, which is reported here as well. It is a questionnaire that probes the user regarding their emotional response based on 3 dimensions that are the valence, that is whether an emotion is perceived positive or negative, arousal, that is the intensity of the experienced emotion, and dominance, that is the level of control that you had of that emotion during the interaction. This is a picture-based questionnaire, so it is very intuitive for a participant to understand and feel. Moving on, trust has also been an aspect of interest during user interaction that has gained a lot of relevance especially in the last 10 years. Now we will need another lecture just to define what trust is, but very broadly speaking, in this context, trust is your confidence in accepting the risk of something else doing part of your task and feeling safe while doing so, while relying on this person, on this other agent, generally speaking. So it is something that you put on an agent, on someone that has a sort of embodiment, whether physical or cognitive. So one of the most used questionnaires to assess trust towards robots is the multidimensional measure of trust, which is able to probe two different dimensions in which you can intend trust. One is the capacity trust. That is the trust that your trust that the robot will do the task in an efficient and effective way. Moral trust is your trust that the robot, in fulfilling its task, applies a set of moral or ethical principles, which are very I would say, dual ways of meaning trust. So this questionnaire is able to cover both of them, and it's also good for repeated measurements. That is, if you want to collect during your experiment, you want to collect trust in the system multiple times, you can. This questionnaire is very good at it. Another questionnaire is the Trust in Automation questionnaire that, again, is only related to capacity trust. So it explores it in greater detail than the multidimensional measure of trust questionnaire. It's also good because while the MDMT questionnaire refers to robots specifically, this one doesn't refer to robotic agents, but to automated agents. So you don't necessarily need a physical embodiment in this case, which makes this questionnaire more versatile. Something else that you can assess about your interaction is the workload. That is more precisely the perceived workload of the users. And this doesn't relate much to the system directly, but on the task itself that you are that the user is undergoing. And for your purposes, you can use this questionnaire to make your case about whether your system allows the user to feel a less cognitive workload during the task at hand. And this questionnaire measures workload in terms of mental, physical, and temporal demand, and performance, effort, and frustration, all parameters that are defined in the handbook of the questionnaire. Then, if you want to measure the user experience, and this is something that really highly relates to experience with user interfaces, you can also use these other two questionnaires, the user experience questionnaire and the attractive questionnaire, which are Likert scales that have adjectives at each opposite adjectives at the opposite of each instances of the Likert scales. And these are good because they allow you to probe pragmatic and hedonistic qualities of user interfaces, which are two common features of user interfaces. Again, though both are good for the purpose, you can choose the one that most relates to your specific application. Now, I've shown you a lot of questionnaires from literature that, but bear in mind that these were not made specifically for you. So when you're going to go through them and you might think that maybe they're not suited for what you want to assess, nothing prevents you from making your own questionnaire. And for this, there are a lot of tools online that you can use. I would suggest to use Qualtrics because it provides you with a lot of options and allows you to store data very safely. They really stress about safety policies. In devising your own questionnaire, you can also get inspired from technology acceptance model that were designed throughout the decades. So the TAM model is one of the first ones and talks about relates user acceptance to perceived usefulness and perceived ease of use. You can also there also have been evolutions of this model that consider social influence and facilitating conditions of the interaction. And there's also the UTAUT model that also considers performance expectancy and effort expectancy. No matter so if you are going to make your own questionnaire, no matter how you're going to devise it, you should compute what is called the Cronbach's alpha, which is a measurement, which is the quantity that is an indicator of the coherence of your questionnaire. By coherence, we mean the capability of the ability of your questionnaire to to be referred to ask the same questions every time. Ideally, your questionnaire will be aimed to probe a specific quantity or interest for you. So the Cronbach's alpha tells you whether these questions do make sense, are coherent for you to determine that specific parameters of yours. It is something that you don't compute. So I'm not going to go through the technicalities of the formula because you can look it up. It's not that complicated. It's a ratio of variances of the different items of your questionnaire. But it is something that you cannot do prior to administering your questionnaire. You devise your questionnaire, you get your answers, and then you compute the Cronbach's alpha. And this has been done for all the questionnaires that I've described you before. In the scientific papers, they've always measured this parameter to give you a quality measurement of the questionnaire itself. So now we are going into the last set of measurements that are the bias measurements. Again, the bias is important to consider because it allows you to understand how reliable your result is. Because, for instance, if you get good performances with a certain pool of participants, but all your participants were younger than 25, a reviewer can say, oh, okay, but you got very good performances because you got a pool of participants that were very good with technology. Are you sure you would have got the same results if your participants were above 65? These are all aspects that you need to take into account while you're recruiting the participants. So you need to be aware of how biased they are towards your experiment. So again, it's important that you carry out this analysis. It's not a detriment to your study, but a way to better understand it, to understand what happened and carry out second-level analysis of your validation. I would say you have to do them if you are running a between subject study, and this is because when you do it, when you get one single measure from a participant, it's impossible for you to tell the bias apart from the measurements. Where instead, in a within subject study, you can do this because since you get multiple measurements of the same person, and when you're comparing conditions, usually you don't look at the values themselves, but the difference between them. In computing this difference, you sort of cancel out this bias. So it affects much less the reliability of your results. So again, this is up to you, but it never hurts to run a bias analysis. But again, it's something that you have to do before starting the experiment. Otherwise, you're going to condition them on your experiment itself, and the bias analysis will not be good. Again, this can mostly be done through other questionnaires that are meant specifically to assess bias regarding certain aspects. I'm showing you two of them. One of these is the negative attitude towards robots that measures mistrust in robots regarding interaction with them, social influence of them towards the user, and regarding the emotions that the user feel towards robots while interacting with robots. This is strictly related to robots. If you're looking for something more general, you can look up the propensity to trust in technology questionnaire that refers to technology in general. And I would say this is a good questionnaire to measure bias, especially since you all have very diverse applications to consider. So now I've talked to you about, I've shown you a lot of stuff today, and I know it can feel overwhelming a little bit, but now you have all the tools that you need to think about your user studies. So I would say be mindful of them. I've purposely shown you a lot because you can get inspired differently. So you can start thinking about what I would like to collect, what makes sense for my system to measure in order to make it shine, to make users understand, to make people, readers understand that my system carries value compared to other ones. So if you manage to think about your final validation at the end, you can already tailor the design of your prototype accordingly. And this is going to save you a lot of time. So now my part is over. So I'm going to hand it over to Maria, who's going to talk about the project work plan.
Okay, thank you. If you can go on sharing slides.
Yes, I'm going to go to the next one. Yes.
Okay, my part today will be very, very concrete. So it's not the same presentation because Francesco was showing you some tools you may use. What I will go to introduce is how to design your work, not only the part referring to the user study, but overall the development work. So you are now in the phase that you can start drafting a work plan because you should have chosen your concept and you are ready to make it a prototype. So when you start to draft a work plan, first of all, you need to set the stage. That is to define concrete objective and their scope. It's a time you need to define in detail what you will do. Indeed, the project objectives are key because are the aim you have to go, and they need to be smart. Smart state for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. That means that the objective need to be very clear, specific. They need to be measurable some way. If you go for a user study, you may use some of the tools that Francesco was introducing. You have to be sure that you are able to achieve them. And to achieve them in the time boundary you have to respect. In this case, you will have 6 months, more or less. And they should be relevant. Okay, so you have to decide what you want to do and prepare a list of what you want to do. And you have to decline your objective in terms of different priority. Usability, you have seen now with Francesco, but also ethics, first of all, because you have to guarantee an ethical development. You have to guarantee an adequate data management. You have already done training on that, and you have to be sustainable, not only now, but also in the future. Keep in mind that we are talking of a work plan for a very short period of time. Again, in your case, it's 6 months, but it should be the first step for the development of something that will last in the future. Also, you are working in a couple. You have a technical and a creative scope. So you will have a part of technical work and you have a part of creative work, but you have also the need to collaborate. So work plan should be more or less the output of what you will do in this period of concept feasibility. Next, Francesco. So you have now a chapter of your document where you explain objective. Now we have to take this objective and split them in work packages. A work package is a portion of work, is a clear activity. Again, making the example on the 6 months time scale, I think that 3-4 work packages are fine. The number of work packages depend a lot on the kind of activity you will go to do, but depend also on the time, because work package may run parallel, but in this case you need more resources because one person do one thing and another person does another one. Or there may be one after the other and you need more time at the end. Again, when you move to a work package, you have to define the specific objective of the list you have done before that you want to implement with such work package, with such activity. Split it in additional small chunk of work, so very elementary activity you may do. You have to decide who will be responsible, a person or a team, how many hours, how many days you think to need, because if you have 5 people, you have to decide where to put which people to work on, and what is your expected output. Because if you go back to the SMART objective, you need to be able to assess, to evaluate the result of each work package. This is what is done normally in a work plan structure. Keep in mind that you need to synchronize creative and technical activity, because it's quite easy that the technical people, artistic people work independently, and you have to find a way to work together. And we will discuss later in the next training. When you go for task, think that our time unit will be 15 days. So you have to think of a small task within a work package with a duration of a couple of weeks. Okay. And is really important that since the beginning, so when you start writing a work package, you think who will be in charge of. Because you will have a developer, for example, that needed to do something. You have a tester that, for example, need to do what Francesco was saying about usability. For example, one of your work package may be usability test, user study, okay? And if you have data, you need to have a person taking care of data. And the same on the artistic side. So not only what to do, but who does what. Otherwise, the main issue is that you need more time than the one you have planned at the beginning. Okay? Last point is that since the beginning, you have to start drafting also your timeline. So the sequence of work packages, I told you before that the work packages may happen in parallel or may happen in a sequence, in a line. And more or less, if we have to think of the 6 months time frame you have in front of you, in the first month you have to clearly design each piece of work. Then you may start in the second month to prototype. And my suggestion is to start prototyping and to start immediately after to test. So work really in an iterative way. You make small pieces of work and you test immediately. You see that you have put a month, 2 months, 5 for prototyping, a month, 3 months, 6 for testing, because, okay, you need to start to develop something to be tested, and probably at the end, when you have finished your complete development, you still need some refinement, some testing, documentation, these kind of things. So this is the basic you have to put in your work plan. The key element you need to be able to run the prototyping phase. And I think it's all on my side.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you, Francesco. As usual, we have now some time for Q&A in case someone has any question about what we have been talking today.
Yes. I saw a see a raised hand.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, Francesco, if there are actually standards for the Muse user testing for the number of users. Of course, it depends on the project and on the type and of the users that we underline to be our key users. But do we have a number, a generic number to rely on?
So it doesn't, it's not specific of the Mosaic project. I mean, it's what allows you to give you a statistical significance to your results. So Ideally, in the most ideal of these worlds, for each condition it's generally good if you had at least 30 participants. I acknowledge that could be demanding in the context of the project, so I would say there's not specific number. If you can aim for as many as you can, of course, without this jeopardizing the correct development of your prototype, the better. Bear in mind there are also statistical methods that work when the pool of participants is very low. But I would say yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go below 10. Below 10 is it starts be it's easy that any reviewer could question about the reliability of the samples.
Thank you.
I have a question, Francesco.
Yes.
So when you talk about user studies and we are looking at the TRL5 to accomplish, like normally in a line of development, where do you bring in user studies? Taking into account first, you have a lot of development work to do.
Well, it's not necessarily I mean, a user study it can be run at any point. I mean, once the groups, I would say, once the groups deem to have a system that can be deployed in the interaction they have devised, I think it's good for them to run a user study. Then nothing prevents you from doing it once, collecting feedback, and then running it again in a second instance. That's also a possibility. I mean, that would be, you could also even compare the performances of the two different user studies if you want to. But generally speaking, the user study is not related to a TRL level. But I would say as soon as you think it suits well the settings in which you're going to administer it, you could start running it.
For sure, you need to do something for TRL5. I mean, you may do in a protected environment, you may do in your lab, but if you want to say that you have reached TRL5, you need to demonstrate some interaction with users.
Yes, also in a relevant environment. That's why you need to make sure that the prototype is well planned for a relevant environment.
Can I ask a question about the time frame? Is this a typical time frame for this kind of turnaround for the development? And I was kind of building on the last question, but like if you were doing this in your lab, how long would you guys normally work on through this process of developing and then testing?
Well, it depends on your objective. Normally, if you have a very well-defined since the beginning work to do, probably 6-9 months may be enough. But it depends a lot on what you do. Keep in mind that normally you will have to reiterate a lot of time. So again, it depends on the quantity of work, on the quantity of activities you are planning at the beginning. This is another suggestion, maybe in this specific case, to focus on a specific aspect of your concept. You cannot develop everything in 6 months. This is clear because part of your work in this initial phase of before prototyping is to decide which part of your work are more relevant and needed to be developed as a starting point.
It was very useful, Francesco, to see the breakdown of the experiments and
Thank you. I'm glad to hear.
the flow. Yeah.
Any other question?
I wonder if any of the companies present here have this kind of experience with doing any of these experiments, or user, or anybody who's here.
I can comment quickly. I think we do a lot of digital products, and I feel that it's often more of a like an ongoing process, because the product is often changing all the time. So you maybe try with the users like an MVP, change a little bit, and you always have like ongoing tests. So it's not always that thing of like you stop, test with the user, and then finish the product and deliver it. It's more of a process that it's always happening.
More of a practical question for the teams. So they are going to design these experiments in a coming deliverable and work plan. Are the technical mentings who have more experience with the flow of the design of these experiments, providing support in the design of these or feedback?
I mean, University UOM is here. University of Manchester is here. So of course, if any of the groups has a specific question regarding user study, yes, they can refer those, can send those questions. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Because in my case, in our case, could be useful to discuss, because maybe we have a different project, so it could be interesting to discuss. Could be really useful if possible to.
Yeah, no. As I said at the beginning, this it's not tailored to specific groups, but I know that some of these concepts may apply more or less according to the group. Yes, I know.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, maybe if it will be possible, maybe to have a small consultation just before submitting it on the specific case, it would be very nice, maybe to identify some specific questions on the project. So maybe we will send out an email with the doubts on the specific.
Yes, of course.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, I don't see in the form of the deliverable that we got any of this mentioned. So if we could clarify what is the deliverable then, and if we have to do that now, that would be extremely useful, as we basically have 2 weeks.
So do you mean the user study design?
Yes.
So no, I don't think you need to be so detailed for the deliverable. That's for the concept feasibility. But that's why, as I said at the beginning, that's why we show this now, because supposedly the validation that you're going to carry out at the end, it has somewhat to affect the design, the feasibility that you are thinking about right now. So this is why we did this training at this point.
If I may add, we expect this description not in the deliverable we are going to prepare in the next 2 weeks, that is deliverable 2, but in the next one, where you have to answer a question about your reflection on feasibility and to present the work plan. Initially, it was planned, I think, around the 10th of January, but I don't know if it will be also postponed. I have no idea of this, but for sure, this training was planned some months ago, and the idea was that today was the day you started to work on feasibility. So,
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then I think we can leave it here for today. Thank you, Francesco, and thank you, Maria, and thank you to everyone for being here. As you know, the recording will be uploaded on our shared drive folder.